Today, you get to hear a story of a person that is incredible. Like one of the kindest people you'll meet, one of the smartest people you'll meet. The job that he does is just this incredible work. And and more than likely, he might be one of the few people in this room that knows more about college women's gymnastics than I do. And that's saying something. He's also the one that will call me out when I say something wrong about sports. But he knows a lot about church. He's been in it a long time. But I want to welcome Nate to the stage. Meet Nate.
Hey, everybody. All right. You have officially given the mic over to me. Now I have all the power. So there's no telling where we're going to go from here. I don't know. But I'm really excited to share my story with you guys today. Very grateful to Chad for him asking me to speak. So I'm just going to jump right in. But first, before I jump into my story, I think we all grow up in... there's a background, a sociological structure, right, that we all grow up in. And so I want to explain just a little bit about my background that I grew up in. So I grew up in church. I didn't just grow up going to church. I grew up with a dad that was in vocational ministry. So I was there Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, was there multiple times a week, running around in the back, right? And then was there on Sundays as well. And so my dad started out his ministry in the Southern Baptist Church. And so for those of you which show of hands, who has attended Southern Baptist churches at one point or another? Okay, wow, that's a lot of you guys. Okay, wow. So there are plenty of you who may not know a lot about it. I have a slide that is the history of church denominations. So you can see this is the slide that is like the history of all the different church denominations. So obviously, hang on, this one, the Southern Baptist one, is the correct one, right? So that is the church that I grew up in. I did not learn until maybe 2 years ago the history of the origins of the Southern Baptist Church. So the Southern Baptist Church, I grew up in Georgia. The Southern Baptist Church was formed in Augusta, Georgia in 1845. Originally, you had the Baptist Church, which is a little bit above that in history. There you got the Reformed Baptist Church that was formed first. The reason that the Southern Baptist Church was formed was because the larger National Baptist Organization had decided that they did not want slave owners to hold ministry titles in the Baptist Church. So then there was this group of 300 churches that decided, we're not a part of you anymore. We do want slave owners to hold ministry titles. And so that is basically the origins of the Southern Baptist Church. So eventually, the Southern Baptist Church did apologize for their history of their stances on slavery and racism. Does anybody want to guess when they formally apologized for their views? Last year. That's a very good guess. Any other guesses? I don't know. 2020. They were focused on other stuff in 2020. I'll get into that. So they officially apologized in 1995. They were publicly against the civil rights movement. So they apologized for that in 1995 as well. But shortly after that, they started to focus on other areas, other organizational things that they saw, what they believed. So since 1995, they have focused on things like reducing and further reducing women's role in ministry. So way back when, they didn't have any official doctrine on women being, in vocational roles. And then they decided, hey, women can't be lead pastors. And then I think just this past year, if I'm not right, they said women cannot have a pastor title in any way whatsoever. They also have, I don't know if you guys know, the Houston Chronicle and San Antonio Express News. Is that right, Chad? I don't know if Chad's even here. Yeah. So they did an investigation into the Southern Baptist Church that basically showed that they, as an organization, were intentionally covering up their leaders' sexual abuse. And so all that to say, that one right there is the right one, right? Like, all the other ones are wrong. And so that's the history of the Southern Baptist Church. However, the family that I grew up in is not necessarily a reflection of that at all. So my dad, before I was born, his first assignment was to be an unpaid intern, which some of our people here might be able to relate to that. But an unpaid intern at a church near Atlanta to be a youth pastor. And so they asked him to do neighborhood ministry. And so my parents, because they were young and he was an unpaid intern, they lived in a very modest apartment close to the church building. And this was in the late 80s or early 90s. And so he was tasked with doing neighborhood ministry. He lived in a modest apartment close to the church building, started doing neighborhood ministry close to the church. Well, that neighborhood was a majority black neighborhood. And so black kids started showing up to youth group. And after black kids started showing up into youth group, the church leadership called him in and they were like, hey, just FYI, we didn't want you to do neighborhood ministry here. We wanted you to do neighborhood ministry over here where our kids are. And so my dad, which my parents did not grow up in church. They met in high school because they said the prayer, right? My dad immediately was like, what are you talking about? I'm done. Like, peace out. So my parents, right, were growing up in this culture that they didn't understand. Their faith was relatively new. My dad was in vocational ministry, right? And he was figuring this stuff out as well. Now to kind of just get into me and, growing up in this family where I think from the beginning, there was a little bit of this dissonance, right, between the culture that we were in and our family and then me. So I was the second born. I grew up, I was very much a rule follower, which is not always common of second borns, but my older brother was a rule breaker. And so I was like, well, I don't want to do that because I'm going to get in way too much trouble if I do that. So I'm going to do this over here, right? So I was a rule follower, like I said. I got good grades. I was able to meet everybody's expectations around me. I went to Christian school. I was able to follow all the rules there, never got in trouble. And was able to kind of maintain everybody's expectations around me. And that fit with me wanting to keep order, keep peace, right? Alexis talked last week about the kind of stages of spirituality being order, disorder, and then reorder. I was really, really good at the order stage. I could have everything figured out. I could follow all the rules. And I did kind of grow up in a bubble in a Christian school. My dad was in vocational ministry. He did eventually was like, okay, I don't know if SBC is fully for me, and went to those non-denominational, right, churches, those mega churches. But I grew up in this bubble, and I also grew up with a pretty narrow reading of Scripture and how to interpret Scripture. But then, I went to college. I went to a very, secular college. It was a very diverse school, which I think it's the greatest school in the world. It's Davidson College. We have the greatest basketball player ever to go there, Steph Curry, which I know is not a good thing to say in San Antonio, but yeah. So I went to school, and then I still maintained my order in college, but and was able to follow all the rules and meet people's expectations, but I could see the diversity around me and see that not everything always fit neatly into place. And then after that, I moved to the Dominican Republic. When you move to a different culture and see people living life a different way, there's no Southern Baptist churches, right, in the Dominican Republic. Maybe there are. I could be wrong, but I didn't go to any of them. And so moving there, it just you start to, I don't know, just see that where you grew up just doesn't fit with everybody's story around you. And so I started to live kind of in awe, right, in college, and then lived in awe in another culture. I technically went as a missionary, and I do put that in quotes because I really didn't have anything to offer in the Dominican Republic. It is a very Catholic Christian country, right? They know who Jesus is. I was working at a school, but meanwhile, Dominicans were teaching me how to live day-to-day life, right? They were teaching me how to live life differently, how to have a different rhythm, how to do laundry a different way, right? How to turn on the stove a different way. All these very basic things they were teaching me how to do, and they were teaching me their language, right? And I was learning everything through their language instead of my own. And so it was a very, Chad's talked a lot about awe. I had just a lot of moments of awe living in the Dominican Republic. And when it came to spirituality and Bible study and going to Bible study in Spanish instead of English, and realizing that things are written very differently in different languages, and those word families of what this word means, it's not the same, right? It's not, you just can't read it exactly the same because it's a different language. And that being a very positive experience for me finally allowed me to start to, okay, maybe I can step back and this thing that I've studied my whole life, I can read differently, read it through different lenses, and figure out, I don't know, more about it and more about what it's saying, what it's not saying. Maybe the things I was always taught growing up are not, maybe there's other ways to look at it. And so when I moved back to the States, I went to grad school. So I was going to school to be a school psychologist. That's what I do now. I gave myself permission to go back and read through everything again, read it with more of an open mind, go back to what those original Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic words might have meant, right? Go and study what rabbis say about this passage and not just what a Southern Baptist preacher would say about it, right? So go and listen to those different perspectives. And to give myself that permission, at the same time, one thing that I was really struggling with was my sexuality. And I was always taught growing up that, like, hey, if you believe enough, if you pray enough, if you do all the right things, then you're going to have a very fruitful life with a wife and 2.5 kids and, all the things, right? And so that's what, I really wanted to believe that about myself growing up. But I was getting to a point where I just couldn't deny who I was anymore. So I went through and really studied, and I came up with every single good argument as to why that traditional view of marriage is too narrow and doesn't, is, outside of how God truly sees humanity and how he sees people. I'm not going to get into that today. If you're one of those people who has those questions or wants to get into it, I spent so much time studying all that stuff and going back to what the Bible says. So if you want to talk about that with me, you can talk about that some other time. Chad's done it too, even though he's a straight white guy, right? So you can do it with Chad as well. I actually encourage you to do it with multiple people with multiple perspectives. So I was able to convince myself and debate myself, the teachings that I had grown up with, that this was okay, that this was not flawed. And I believed it up here, but it took a lot longer for me to believe it here. And around that time period, I was, finishing up grad school, getting into my career. around that time period, my mental health started to deteriorate. The pandemic was happening. That was not fun. But I started having panic attacks. And funny enough, as a mental health professional, I've seen panic attacks in other people. The first time I had one, I thought that I was dying. I thought I was having a heart attack. I felt my body reacting. And I was like, called one of my friends. I was like, I need to go to the hospital. Like, I don't know what's going on. And then he came over and he was like, I think you're having a panic attack. And I was like, what? No, I'm not having a panic attack. Like, I know what those are. And he was like, yeah, I think you're having a panic attack. And so he helped me out. But I just had this very obvious, like, I know what these are. I continued to have some panic attacks and anxiety attacks. I had one while I was driving at one point. That's not fun. I got to the point where I had realized that I was believing that I was still broken. And I felt that separation from God, but it was a belief about what was going on here. It wasn't anything about what I was doing or how I was behaving. And so there's different perspectives on psychology. So you can go to the next slide. There's 7 modern perspectives on psychology. Most of them are kind of like their own thing, but the 2 that get compared the most because they're complete opposites are behavioral psychology and humanistic psychology. So behavioral psychology, I was going to quiz another psychologist, but she's not here today. So behavioral psychology is, hey, we're only going to study what's observable, what's repeatable, and what we can see. And it is a very scientific approach to the study of human behavior and emotion. And whereas humanistic psychology is pretty much the opposite. It comes out of this belief that all humans generally have a good will for their own life and the life of others, that they have free will, that they can choose in moments, what to do, that it's not just, hey, they're reinforced to do this behavior because of this, that, and the other. And it's funny, my mom was also a psychology major and she worked in a behavioral psychology lab. And in one of my seminars, my senior year of college, we all were looking at the different perspectives. It's pretty much evenly split in the senior seminar with all of us about kind of the one we identified with the most. But I was reading this humanistic view of psychology and I was like, that's what I believe about people most. And humanistic psychology doesn't really fit well with rule-following religion. Because you are innately believing that even if someone sinned, that they had a good reason for why they did what they did, and that it was what they thought was going to lead them to a more healthy life overall in that moment, So it doesn't really fit well with the rule-following nature of things, but yeah, so I kind of started taking that view a little bit more into reading the Bible. And so I want to talk just a little bit about one passage. I'll set it up before I read it, but it's the story of Zacchaeus, which those of you who raised your hand earlier, you probably know the song about Zacchaeus. Like, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. See, trauma. That's trauma right there. So yeah, a lot of you already know the story. So Jesus, at the time in his ministry, he was gaining a lot of popularity and a lot of traction. He had large crowds following him around. He had been healing people, performing miracles. He had been doing his teaching, and he was a pretty popular guy in an area, right, where Rome was occupying Jewish space. And then we have Zacchaeus, who's this guy who, the text says that he is short in stature. Basically at that time, what that means is that he had a physical flaw. And when he had a physical flaw, that automatically marked him as being separated from God within Jewish religion and culture at the time. So we have Zacchaeus, and then he also is a political traitor because he's a tax collector for the Romans. And so basically nobody likes this guy, right? And so that's a little setup. We'll go ahead and read it. Does anybody want to volunteer to read it? I'll have it up on the screen here. Anybody? Anybody? I see people whispering. Yes, awesome. Okay. Jackson, you've got the first slide up there. Awesome. All right, go ahead. And you got it?
In the city of Jericho, there lived a very wealthy man named Zacchaeus, who was the supervisor over all the tax collectors. As Jesus made his way through the city, Zacchaeus was eager to see Jesus. He kept trying to get a look at him, but the crowd around him was massive. Zacchaeus was very short, and he couldn't see over the heads of the people. So he ran on ahead of everyone and climbed up a blossoming fig tree so he could get a glimpse of Jesus as he passed by. When Jesus got to that place, he looked up into the tree and said, Zacchaeus, hurry on down, for I know you're invited to stay at your house today. Yes. So he scurried down the tree and came face to face with Jesus. As Jesus let it go, Zacchaeus, many in the crowd complained, look at this. Of all the people to have dinner with, he's going to eat in the house of a crook.
Yeah.
Zacchaeus joyously welcomed Jesus and was amazed over his gracious visit to his home. Zacchaeus stood in front of the Lord and said, half of all that I own I will give to the poor, and Lord, if I have cheated anyone, I promise to pay back 4 times as much as I stole. Jesus said to him, this shows that today life has come to you in your household, for you are a true son of Abraham. The Son of Man has come to seek out and to give life to those who are lost.
I'm so glad I asked you to read because you read it so much better than I would have read it. That was great. Thank you so much. So now that I've given myself permission to read this more like humanistic view on this story, right? That Zacchaeus generally has goodwill. He's trying to make the best of his life, right? Looking at Zacchaeus and what it describes about him, we know he's someone who, like, automatically Jews saw, you're separated from God before he ever even became a tax collector, right? And so if you're kind of kicked out or kicked to the curb in one culture, like, why not go ahead and help out the occupying group and be a tax collector for the Romans, right? Because they at least see a little bit of economic value to you, and the Jewish people don't see value to you, right? So it's like, I might have made the same decision as Zacchaeus, right? I might have been a tax collector at the time. And the thing that I keep coming back to over and over again in my life in this story is that this one is structured in sequence just a little bit differently, because the thing that was separating Zacchaeus from Jesus was part of who he was. It was not necessarily what he did. Yeah, it does talk about what he did and him being super unpopular, but he was pushed to the side because he was shorter than everybody else. They knew that they could push him to the side. And because he was shorter than everybody else, the crowd's like, yeah, get away. You know, we want access to Jesus. You have to be pushed to the side. And so that kind of sticks with me, because I think a lot of times I hear about, you know, being gay or there's a lot of different identities that we all have. That like, oh, is it your identity or is it just a behavior, right? Is it a lifestyle? Is it a choice? Is it not a choice, right? All these things that we hear, that, you know, when you start to live it yourself, just don't fit into the story, into my own story. And so, and then as the story moves on, it's not Zacchaeus getting Jesus' attention, right? Zacchaeus doesn't say a prayer. Zacchaeus doesn't ask to be healed, right? He is just up there in the tree, and Jesus is the one who spots him, right? Zacchaeus didn't do anything. You know, he was separated from Jesus because of who he was. And then he didn't do anything besides climbing a tree to try to like see him as he walked by. And then Jesus is the one who points them out. Meanwhile, Jesus is super popular in Jewish culture, and he's pointing out someone who's helping out the Romans all at the same time, right? And so, like, Jesus knew this was probably the inconvenient, unpopular move, but he chose to do it anyway. And so when I just look at this story, I see that Zacchaeus, right? He doesn't promise to live a righteous life, and then Jesus be like, okay, yay, now you're saved, right? Jesus seeks him out before Zacchaeus ever promises anything, and Jesus shows him that no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how inconvenient it is for me, that I love you and I choose you, and I'm going to stay with you and spend time with you in your house, even though the crowd hates you, has outcast you, all of those things. And so it wasn't Zacchaeus promising to live a righteous life that then Jesus was like, okay, I'll have a relationship with you. Jesus chose that beforehand. And then out of Zacchaeus believing his identity that he was loved by Jesus, he then turns around and says, okay, now I'm going to, it was like a response to Jesus' love where he's like, I'm going to live this moral kindness, this righteousness, right? Like I'm going to give back all of these things. And so I think that for so much of my life growing up, I was trying to live a righteous life, right? Trying to stay right with God, be right with God. And then there's something in my identity that just blew that wide open and made that impossible. And I really struggled with those moments where I didn't believe it. And when I felt most separated from God was when I didn't believe that Jesus loved me for who I was. And so, it takes a lot of work to get it from here to here. It takes a lot of time. But this is just a story that I think shows that someone is acting out of a belief that they're loved. And it's a great example for me. And so I'll close out with a quick story. The thing that really ended up helping me, I wasn't in a mentally healthy place. So believe it or not, mental health professionals do have to go to therapy sometimes. And so I went to therapy. When I was looking for a therapist, I thought, okay, I want a guy who's gay, a little bit younger. I did not want to date this person, I promise, right? But I was thinking I need someone who understands what I'm going through, right? Who's in relatively my stage of life. So I was looking around for different therapists, and then the one that was recommended to me was a woman in her 60s. And I was like, that is not what I was asking for, right? But then I started therapy, and this woman she's been doing therapy for 35 years. She's amazing, right? She was the perfect therapist for me. She helped me to figure out how to believe what I knew up here, right, and for myself. And I also asked for specifically non-Christian, right? And so believe it or not, Jesus can show up in therapy when it's non-Christian therapy and, and teach you how he loves you through that. But it was towards the end of my year of therapy that I had with her where I was talking about coming out to my parents and all that stuff. And that was the stressor at that time towards the end of my therapy. And at the end of one of the therapy sessions, she said, I keep my relationships with my clients very professional, and I don't disclose a lot of personal information, which I'm a mental health professional. I know that she was doing all that stuff like she was supposed to, very, very ethically. She said, I just want you to know that, this was after 8 or 9 months. She's like, I just want you to know that I grew up in the Baptist church and I'm a lesbian. I came out later in life. I was married, had a daughter, and came out later in life. So she said, I just want you to know that I know what you're going through. And so for someone to build this therapeutic relationship, to use scientifically backed therapeutic methods, right? To not bring faith into the conversation too much, but then to show up in that way and to have been that unselfish in therapy when she probably could have said for 8 or 9 months, yeah, me too, yeah, me too, yeah, me too. And she didn't do that. Jesus showed up in her in that relationship with me. And so, even though she was nothing that I asked for, she was everything that I needed. But yeah, so that's most of my story. I thank you guys for listening. It's been great sharing it with you guys. If you have any questions about more details of my story, I'm more than happy to talk about it with y'all. But thank you guys so much.
one thing you didn't talk about was your handsome husband. Sam, stand up, give a wave, come on. I was sitting in my office. I don't know who it was talking to him, but they were like, hey, you're first lady. I think it was Taryn. She's like, hey, how's it feel to be first lady today, Sam? If you grew up in church, the pastor's wife, first lady, it was cute. I think it was Taryn. I just started laughing. Man, we have a community here that I think is just incredible. And I love that we get to hear stories. Thanks, Nate, for sharing. I'm going to tell a quick story. I know hang on. I wrote a Substack probably a month or so ago about this story about a river where bodies were being, like these people were in a river or in a village next to a river, and this body came floating down, and they went and they grabbed it and they pulled it out, and then another body came and they pulled it out, and another body, and it got to the point where there were so many bodies coming down the river that they were building out like this assembly line basically to grab and like pull bodies out of the water. And during this process, it just kept coming. They were building stuff, they were doing all this work, and then there was someone who was like, hold on, and they started to walk away from the assembly line. And they started to get yelled at. Like, where are you going? What do you do? You got to help us. There's so much happening. You got to be here. And this person walks away and begins to walk upstream. And as they're walking upstream, what they're doing is asking the question of like, where are these bodies coming from? We've got to go figure out what's happening. Why are these bodies floating down the river? And in my story, I talked about how when I grew up in the church, there was this system that I was taught of how to do church and what to do and how to be a good Christian. And there was a moment in my life when I started to deconstruct where I was like, I have to go upstream. Something's not working here. I know we're just trying to save bodies, but it's just not working. And as I began to walk upstream, I got yelled at, and people told me I'm a heretic, and that I'm a cotton candy preacher, and that I just want to love everybody. I'm like, I think that's the point. But in the story that I wrote, I talked about how when I got upstream, I found a group of people that had built a fire, and they were around the fire, and they were trying to help save people from going into the water. And it was a place where when I got there, they began to invite me to the fire and give me food and teach me about what forgiveness and love and care and kindness and what joy looks like and peace in your life. And the people in my life that I began to find that from were people like Nate, who I'd been told my whole life can't be with Jesus, is too short, right? There's something wrong with them. And it was people like Nate who, when I got up there, they taught me what forgiveness really was and what caring for someone really is. It was a lot of my LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters that began to teach me things about Jesus that I never experienced as a kid growing up in the church. And I can't thank them enough for teaching me what love is. It changed my life. It changed how I see God, how I see myself, and ultimately how I see others. And it made a way for us to start to put together this community that we can just love people well. That we can realize that the people that Jesus did life with are the people that a lot of religion just says they don't belong here. And the only reason they were already upriver when I walked up there was because they'd already been told that they're not part of this anymore. That they can, hey, you can be part of it, but when you ask to start to volunteer, they're like, well, hold on. You can't do that. Until you fix some things, you can't greet someone at the door, or you can't work in the killed kids ministry, or you can't and they were like, all right. And they walked upriver. But it was upriver where they were actually teaching people what love looks like and forgiveness and grace. And when I got there, they were the most welcoming group I've ever seen. And so I can't thank Nate enough. There's so many. Judy, Debbie. I could name the people in my life that have just shown me what love is. And as Nate pointed out, as a straight white man, there's a lot of unlearning that I had to do. And there was a lot of, even in the process of trying to figure out what we were going to do with the church, and when things got tense and we had to make some decisions, and we were told that, hey, we can keep doing this thing, the money will keep coming, you just have to stop telling people that they can be here. I remember sitting at the table, and Rob also straight white man, looking across and be like, you realize like the theology that we hold and the place that we're at and the people that we've experienced, if we can't welcome people, then I don't think we're teaching the gospel. And also, you realize that as two straight white men, this is not the best decision for us as a church. We could go do the system, and we could do this thing the way it's supposed to be done. So if you want to ask me to do that, we could. I can't anymore. I've already been upriver. And so if that means that you're taking money and you're leaving, then we'll figure it out. And we have for a year and a half. It hasn't always been easy, but man, as Martin Buber says, when you experience the I, thou moment, it's a moment of experiencing a piece of the eternal thou. And I don't think there's anything more important than that, or more valuable than that. And so that's why we are who we are and we operate the way we operate. It's because I think love is all we're supposed to be about. So take that with you and go love well, because it's who you're made to be. And we'll see you next week. We've got another story coming, and it's going to be incredible. So love you guys. Thanks, Nate. Bye.